Greetings, everyone. My name is Salim Ali, and I'm delighted to host today Professor Riffat Hassan, who is an emeritus professor at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. She is a distinguished scholar of feminism and religion and has taught at the university for 33 years. Previously, she's also held appointments at Villanova University, Oklahoma State University, and has been a fellow at Harvard Divinity School as well. Dr. Hassan's degrees are from Durham University in the UK. In addition to her academic work, she's also the founder of the Salam Network for Interfaith Dialogue and has been one of the leading lights in trying to improve understanding of Islam within the current cultural context where there is so much discord and concern about the rights of Muslims in America. So, Dr. Hassan, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Would you give us a quick summary of some of your notable achievements in research and how your work has made a contribution to the literature?
Thank you very much, Salim, for having me. In terms of my research, I would like to begin by saying a few words about my research on Allama Iqbal. That was my study since I was very young. And then at the University of Durham, I wrote my PhD thesis on Iqbal. It's called The Main Philosophical Writings, Main Philosophical Ideas in the Writings of Iqbal. Significance of that is that although a lot of articles and books, etc., have been written about Allama Iqbal, nobody had tried to link all his various fields of philosophy. For example, he has written about epistemology, he's written about aesthetics, he's written about political philosophy, philosophy of religion, human life, concept of khudi, religious concepts, and so on. So there are many separate areas of philosophy in which Allama Iqbal did very distinguished work. And what I was doing in my thesis was I brought them all together. So I constructed what may be called an architectonic model in which you can look at all the various aspects of his thought. So the importance of that to Pakistan, I will tell you afterwards, because I think Allama Iqbal remains extremely relevant and important for Pakistan. So that was my study of Iqbal, and it is continuing. I still am, working on a number of projects. In fact, I'm reworking some of my earlier writings, and I've written 3 or 4 books on Iqbal. So hopefully, I would like them to be republished. So that's one area. The other area is the Islamic theology of women, what you call feminist theology. I call it the Islamic theology of women. And I started doing this work in 1974 when I realized for the first time that there was a big discrepancy between what the Quran says about women's rights and what is actually happening to women in Muslim societies. There's a big gap between the cultural reality and what the Quran says. And so that was a starting point of my work, and it has continued. That has been, in a way, one of the central areas of my life. And I have worked on this Islamic theology, not just from an academic point of view, but from both experiential and practical point of view, in the sense that this research is very relevant to the actual lives of Muslim women. So I've traveled the world talking about it, all the way from Turkey to Indonesia to in Europe and US and so on. So this is very important work, and I am continuing to work in this area. And the third area that I would like to mention here is, you can say, interreligious dialogue and peacemaking. I was part of the initial interreligious Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue group that started in 1978 under the auspices of the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. And so that was a conversation amongst scholars of these three religions. And again, that has continued. That was the first regular program or project that I'm mentioning. But out of that, those conversations that we had, that project was called the Trialogue. It lasted for many, many years. And out of that conversation developed the discipline of interreligious dialogue. Before that, it didn't exist. So that has been also very, very important work in my life. And connected to that is what I would call peacemaking. For example, after 9/11, when the relationship between the US and Muslim countries was at a very, very low ebb, the State Department announced this competition. It was called Islamic Life in the US. And that was an exchange program. And what the goal of it was to improve the understanding amongst Muslims and Americans. They wanted to show Muslims that Islam was well and alive and well in the US. And there was a lot of work going on, studies and so on going on. And so I developed that. I got that grant first of all, and then I developed the program, which was a 4-country program: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. And I brought delegations from those areas to the US and took Americans back to South Asia. And then after that grant finished, it was continued, and I got another grant. It was called Religion and Society, a Dialogue. So over a period of 8 years, I think we accomplished a lot, and we founded a network of people who are very committed to dialogue. And of course, as you know, grants end, and the grant ended, but there are still very strong links. So I think those are the main areas I think I would like to mention.
That's fantastic. And as you alluded to already, this work has direct relevance to Pakistan. And you have, of course, lived and worked in Pakistan also. And so maybe you can now comment on how some of your work has impacted Pakistani policies, as well as what may be the future contributions of your work to Pakistan's development.
Okay. First of all, I want to talk about Allama Iqbal, because as you know, Allama Iqbal is recognized as a spiritual founder of Pakistan. I personally would say that if there was no Iqbal, there would have been no Pakistan. Because not only did he conceive of Pakistan, but he was the person who convinced the Quaid-e-Azam, he had gone back to England to practice law, to return and take the leadership of this Muslim struggle. And it was because Iqbal stood so solidly behind him that he was able to get a lot of support also. So I think that, what Iqbal's whole philosophy is about it's about character building. And his main focus was on developing the human character. Iqbal believed that there were certain attributes that strengthened the self, and there were certain others that weakened the self. And his philosophy actually revolves around that. And I have been writing about it for a long, long time. And then I had the experience of being in a very long conversation over more than a decade and a half with Imran Khan, who is now the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And he had sought me out because he was very interested in Iqbal and he wanted to learn about Iqbal. And so this conversation started. And he was very devoted to Iqbal. I was trying very hard to understand it. And in his book called Pakistan, A Personal History, he has the final chapter of his book is about Iqbal. And I was his consultant when he was writing it. But his dream had been that if he ever came to power, he was going to implement the vision of Iqbal for Pakistan. And he has come into power, but I think that he has encountered so many difficulties that Iqbal's time has not yet come. It's disappointing to me, but I think that one way or the other, Iqbal will remain relevant, and I hope and pray that more and more people become interested and start implementing his vision.
What were some of the salient features of Iqbal's vision that you think Imran Khan could have implemented?
Well, if you look at it in a very general way, you could say, well, Iqbal has this concept of Shaheen, and Shaheen is, a very proud, independent spirit, and flies very high, and so it represents the spirit of bravery, the spirit of adventure and courage, and so on. So what Imran has done is he has got some force called the Shaheens or something. He's taken some of these concepts and symbols and tried to implement it this way. This is the Shaheen force, and he talks about the Shaheen in his messages and so on. But of course, the thing is that in order to implement Iqbal's vision, it's not a matter of just making a few statements. It has to be an entire educational program. You have to educate people, from the start, but certainly when they get to the college level, it has to be taught. And I was very keen to teach Iqbal in Pakistan at one time when I was doing the State Department programs. And I happened to spend a lot of time in Pakistan, and I tried to have an opportunity to do that at Government College, which was Iqbal's own university. He studied there, he taught there. And I was told that no such program existed, that in the Department of Philosophy there was no Iqbal studies. And what was very disappointing to me was that the head of the department told me there is no interest in Iqbal. And that absolutely shocked me, that they were saying this in Pakistan. Anyway, Imran was and is, I'm sure, very interested in that. But the realities of politics are something different. And as I said, I'm disappointed that he was not able to do anything. I think the thing is that if Iqbal has to become a reality in Pakistan, Iqbal has to be made a part of the syllabus, the educational syllabus, so that people study it. Not in terms of just, a few verses. Everybody in Pakistan knows a few verses. All the politicians quote a few verses of Iqbal. That's not understanding Iqbal. So I think it has to be made a part of the educational curriculum. I don't know if there's any improvement in the educational curriculum of Pakistan. I think basically that it's in quite a mess from what I read and so on. So,
what about in terms of your work on the role of women in Islam? Has there been some progress there? Yes, you feel?
Definitely. You see, as I said, I sometimes I say I'm an academic by profession and I'm an activist by choice, because I wanted to make my research relevant to life. And and I divide my work, my career as a feminist theologian into 3 phases. And the first phase was between 74 and 84, when I was doing my personal study. And I did this study not only because I wanted to understand the Quran in general, but I also wanted to know how to understand my own life better as a Muslim woman. And then in 1974 and 84 was the time of my study when I was studying the Quran. Then in 85, 4 and 5, I spent 2 years in Pakistan. I was on sabbatical and I had a year's fellowship. And at that time, it was the beginning of the Muslim. You can't say it was a Muslim movement. It was a Muslim group that was called Women's Action Forum that was starting there, and that had started in response to the laws that General Muhammad Ziaul Haq was implementing, which were very anti-women laws, Hudud Ordinance and Qanun-e-Shahadat and Qiyas and Diyat. So these were rules that were directly impacting, having a very strong negative impact on women's position. And women, in any case, in Pakistan, as you would know, has the highest rate of honor crimes and honor killings that in the world. And that was another issue that I spent a lot of years on. But when I was in Pakistan and this group was emerging, they approached me in the summer of that year, 1984, and they said that all these laws are being implemented in the name of Islam. And we don't know anything about it, because this group of women that was leading the Action Forum were all very secular women, very westernized women, and they did not know anything about Islam. So they said, can you help us? You've been studying the subject for 10 years. Now can you tell us what we should do? So I said, well, I'll have to think about it, because doing something for oneself is one thing, and then trying to develop an ideology for a movement is something else. So that started me on my second phase, when I started working it out as to what the main issues were and how they could be implemented. And that was, so that went on. And then unfortunately, we don't have time that we can talk more about it. But my approach was that if Muslim women really begin to understand the rights that the Quran has given them, it will give them tools for their liberation. You know, if there's a young woman, a young girl who wants to go to school, wants to study, and the father says, you cannot, she can say, but this is my Islamic right, that I should go to school. And this is what actually happened in Iran after the revolution of 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini prescribed that all women had to leave co-educational institutions. So they were thrown out of all the universities. And but then they went to him and said, education is an Islamic right. And so they had to give them their universities. And the rate of literacy under Khomeini went up 100%. People don't know that. But it was because these women were very active and they knew their rights, and so they got them. So anyhow, so that was that was the second phase. And then at that point, afterwards, a lot of women's organizations were formed, like Aurat Foundation, Shirkat-Ga, and so on. They were doing things, and I spoke at them at these meetings very often. I think that at a practical level, if you look at statistics for women in terms of education, in terms of economic empowerment and so on, that they definitely have improved. Women today are much more empowered than they were. But I still think that the basic problems are there. I still think that they don't really know, because, with rights also come responsibilities. One can't just say women's rights. What are their responsibilities? Because if the Quran has given equal responsibility to both men and women, when it's a Khalifatullah, human beings, that includes women. So women also have some responsibilities to participate in society, to move it forward. And I don't think, again, that is quite understood in any Islamic country, but certainly not in Pakistan. So that's the other thing that's relevant. And then the interreligious dialogue that I was very interested in 1985, along with some other friends in Pakistan, we started a Muslim-Christian dialogue group. And then when I was implementing the State Department programs, I took a lot of very distinguished scholars, like Hans Kohn from Germany, Leonard Swidler, Dr. Paul Nitter, Rabbi Daniel Polish. These are, world-class scholars. And I had the opportunity to take them to Pakistan, where they met other scholars and had a conversation. So, I think that we started it. But again, as you know, the climate in Pakistan is essentially anti-dialogic, especially when it comes to other religions. So, my hope is that it will change. But, all of these areas in which I have been working, Iqbal and women's liberation and interreligious dialogue, they are all connected. because they are, they basically they revolve around the idea that uh, human beings have been given the gifts by God, have been given the potentiality by God that they can achieve anything in terms of justice and ethics and unity of ideas and people. So they're all connected, and um, so I'm hoping that at some point in time there will be a paradigm shift in Pakistan when we would move, from either being very aggressive about what Islam is or being very defensive about what Islam is to arrive at an understanding of Islam that is like Allama Iqbal's, which can be an instrument for transformation of character and society. So I think all these things are tied together. So if we have a change, then all these things will happen. So I don't know if I've how
Well,
much.
thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights, and for joining the American Pakistan Foundation's series of these webinars. We will, of course, keep in touch. So thank you.